My name is Santiago Suarez Ordoñez. You can call me Santi. I'm going to be talking about CSS locators here, or locators in general. You can get the presentation from that bit.ly. You may want to do it just because there's a lot of links that you may be interested in. You can also follow me on Twitter or find me at Sauce Labs, where I work. So let me go to full screen here. So first, let's put everyone in sync about what locators are, because that's everything the presentation is going to be about, so we better be in sync. Locators are a way to tell Selenium which specific element we want to act on. What does that mean? Selenium, it's an automation library, right? So we got to have a way to tell it, hey, I want to click on this button, or I want to know the text inside this title or this paragraph. And that's why we use locators for, just locating those elements. Now, what's the agenda going to be? First, I'm going to show you why I think you should be using CSS locators instead of XPATH and other styles. Then I'm going to go showing you off how CSS locators work and the basics on them. Then I'm going to show a couple of scenarios in which CSS locators are actually not the right tool for the job. There's not too many of them, but it's good to know them. It will save a lot of time in the future. And then I'm going to show a couple of useful tools that I use on an everyday basis for my job, and I think it's good to share with everyone. So first, why should you use CSS locators? I think there's 4 reasons. One's because they're faster. The other one is because they're more readable than XPATH. The other one is because jQuery uses CSS itself for its main locating strategy. And also the last one is because nowadays no one else uses XPATH anyways. We all know XML is pretty dead by now, hopefully. So why is it faster? So everyone in the Selenium world has this perception that XPath is slow. We've all experienced it in the past, but we never actually captured data to see if it really is fast and if actually CSS is faster. So I did that. I actually built a script that I'm going to show you in a second that will measure several locating strategies in both the CSS and the XPath version. And I would collect that data and try to analyze it for everyone to just see it clearly. So I tried all these locators on every single browser that Sauce Labs supports. So like 3 versions of Opera, 4 of Firefox, Google Chrome last version, 4 versions of IE. So almost every single browser out there. And I tried like ID-based locators, class-based locators, name, and content-based locators, which I believe the most common ones out there. It's better to point out that they're basic locators. They're not chained or nested. That would make things even more complex and probably make the differences even bigger. It's also worth pointing out that I tried these locators on a page that has 1,000 nodes so that I made the DOM complex enough so that it would point out the difference a little bit more. So I got a JSON out of that, and I put it on GitHub on a guest. It's actually, if you are opening the slides, it's just this link. It will take you to the JSON, and it's a lot of data. I tried every single strategy 5 times, and then made an average, and then made a standard deviation, just to make sure I didn't have any outliers that would take the information to the place in which it's not real. So every single browser, for example, this one is Opera 11, tried the 10 or so locating strategies, captured timings, and then compared all of them. I took my own conclusions. You can make yours, but mine were that all the real browsers did pretty well. Firefox, Chrome, Opera, and Safari. Their times were fairly similar. They were all below 0.05 seconds, which is pretty reasonable for a Selenium test. We're talking about tests that take between 30 and 45 seconds. So 0.05 to just find an element in the DOM, it's kind of reasonable. Now, with IE, the results weren't that good. this is the outline of what happened. And yes, I made this whole table with ASCII myself. It took me a while. So these are the results. You'll notice that there's some correlation between the versions. I was pretty sad to see that IE never improved anything in older versions. It's also worth pointing out that IE9, you will see that the times are even slower. And that may not be because IE9 is slow, but just because IE9 requires a different operating system that the others do. So the first three are running on XP, and IE9 is running on Vista. And they may have different virtualization performance, so the difference may be there, and not in the fact that IE is just slower. So you will see that when you use ID-based and name-based locators, CSS is like 2 orders of magnitude faster. We're talking about a tenth of a second versus 17 seconds to just find an element in the DOM. That's huge. Now, when we're talking about class and content, the difference is not that huge, but we're still talking about 5-6 seconds. We just can't make IE fast. That's the reality. We can do the best we can, and that is using CSS. I guess that's all we have for now. But I think numbers are good to see the difference first, but it's awesome to get the whole picture with something visual. So I made this page with a cat and a button and 1,000 notes in it that are hidden. So the thing is that if you click on the button, the cat will move. And I made a test that just clicks on the button a lot of times, first using CSS and then using XPATH, so you can really see the difference. I actually ran in Sauce Labs and made a video. I just got the video from it. But you can see that the workflow is pretty simple. Just open the page, click on it 20 times using CSS. Then open it again to refresh the DOM just in case, and click on it again 20 times using XPath. I got the video offline just in case there was some internet problems. But it's the same thing that you will see in the testing in Sauce Labs. So here, it's open IE9. I use IE9. You could use whatever. The difference is pretty big. So the page is just being loaded. It's going to check for the tail. I don't know why IE takes so long to come back from the open, but that's just waiting. As soon as the click starts, the cat will move. So those are the CSS clicks. Are almost instantaneous. There's also the fact that there's the internet in the middle between my test script and Sauce Labs, which adds like half a second more. Now, the page refreshes, and this is the XPath version. Just open. So the clicks are already happening. My script already called Selenium saying, hey, find this button and click on it. And Selenium is like, OK, I'll find it. Hold on a second. And that is like 30 seconds. And it's going to take a while, but you'll eventually see it. Again, I got to point out, there's 1,000 nodes in that page. So it may take IE a while to parse the DOM. But nowadays, applications are getting complex enough. And UIs, there you go, it clicked. So we'll wait for 5 more, and then the presentation is over. No, what was I going to say? That nowadays applications are getting complex enough, and UIs are having so much elements and divs nested that actually 1,000 nodes is not such a crazy idea. So anyways, we can watch this for a while, but that's not the point. Again, CSS is faster. It's not super fast, but we're dealing with IE. It's just faster, so it's a good thing to keep in mind. Next point, I think they're more readable too. Oh, well, do you want to go in a Q&A or? So the question is IE the problem itself, or is that Selenium is not optimized to work with IE? The thing is, IE doesn't provide a JavaScript function for parsing the DOM using CSS, either CSS or XPath. So other browsers, Selenium just leverages the available functions that you can do. Hey, browser, find me this element, and the browser will give it to you. With IE, you just got to import a whole JavaScript library that will parse the DOM for you, parse your selector, and find the element using JavaScript. And we all know that IE with JavaScript is really slow anyways. That makes for the whole difference. I'm going to talk about Selenium 2 later, too. There's a big difference there. Anyways, why do I think it's more readable? Well, I just compared the basic locators both in the XPATH and the CSS version. You will see that the XPATH version of finding something by ID is this whole thing, chunk full of square brackets and ampersands and slashes. CSS was created with HTML as the core XML to parse. So it can prioritize some locators and say, everyone's going to be looking for IDs, so we should just create a magic word or something that will just give us the ID, and that's the hash bank here. You just use the hash bank. That means I want an element with this ID value. The same thing for class. It just uses a dot instead of having to specify I want an attribute named class and stuff. Now, for attributes that are not ID or class, you can just still use square brackets, but it saves you from using the quotes and the ampersand and stuff. Now, when you don't know the tag, instead of just using an asterisk, you don't use anything. That means all tags. So it's even smaller there. And when you nest them, it's even better. For XPath, of course, you got to use all these slashes, whether you want to make it relative or not. And CSS, you just put a space, and that means relative nesting. So one of the most important reasons, I think, is that jQuery uses CSS as its locating strategy. Sorry. So why do I feel that's so important? Well, you can't see this, but it says that jQuery nowadays is being used on over 30% of the web. That is a lot of websites. That is a lot of developers that can read and write CSS locators. And that's a lot of users testing CSL, which is a CSS parsing engine that jQuery uses and Selenium uses too. So that's a lot of testers. That's a lot of knowledge around CSS that nowadays in XPath really isn't anymore. So I felt that's really important. There's going to be a lot of people that will be able to maintain your tests, read your locators pretty quickly, and just improve them if they have to. And the last reason is because I just think no one else uses XPath anyways. In the Selenium conference, I met a guy that did know XPath a lot. That guy worked for a backend company that did credit card charges, so all they did was XML. All I can say to him is, like, sorry about that. Now, having that said, that we all agree that CSS is the best thing to do, let's take a look at how it works and how to write your own CSS locators. So the basics are, if you want to select a tag, you just put the tag name first. That's going to do the whole thing. If you don't care about the tag that Selenium finds, you just put an empty space and then start with the filtering process later. To mark what would be a direct child, which means I want a table row that is directly inside the table tag, you just use the right angle. If you want a subchild, which means I don't really care if it's directly inside the table or if it's inside 5 elements that are inside the table. I just want a table cell inside that table. You just use a white space, which is pretty handy, and it's what people generally use. For IDs, again, you use a hashbang, hashtag. For class, you use a dot. And for other attributes like name, href, source, or whatever, you just use the square brackets and the final value. Even if the final value has spaces on it, you don't need to quote it. It will just work. Now, for filtering by position, which means I want the 5th table row, you can use the column nth. That's an interesting thing to discuss because the standard CSS specification says that to do that, you got to use 2 things. One is nth child, and the other one is nth of type. I personally believe those are super unreadable. I always have trouble figuring out what they mean every time I have to use them. So I was super happy when Selenium moved on to CSL, which implements this nth thing. John Resig, the creator of Selenium, was like, I don't care about the standard. Fuck that. I'm just going to create my nth, which is faster and easier to understand. And That's what I'm using right now. Now, if you're going to move to Selenium 2, that's a problem on it that we're going to talk about later. And of course, you can always chain them. So you can say, I want this link that has this class and also has this ID and also has this attribute. You can put as many as you want there. It's all pointing to a single element. Of course, if you want to go down the tree, you just add a space and go to the next description. That will take you down the DOM tree to find the element you're looking for. Something you may not know in Selenium is that if your locator matches more than one element, Selenium would just grab the first. Selenium's way of working is only handling one element per time. You can't tell Selenium, click on all the buttons in the page with a single command. You got to find all the buttons and say, click the first, not the second, not the third. And it makes total sense, mostly because Selenium emulates the user. And people don't click things at the same time. They just click one, then click another one. So it may be confusing if you're trying to find something. You have the right locator. And when you call it with Selenium, it will click somewhere else. That's probably because there's another element in the DOM that matches the same locator, and it's above that one. So pay attention to that. I'm going to show you some tools later that will help you filtering such situations. Now, these are the powerful parts of CSS, the ones people don't generally know, but they're pretty useful, mostly when you have applications that are not built with testability in mind. And I've been there, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have too. Developers just won't add an ID to an element because that takes a week of talking to managers to get it in. So you just try to find your way through that without having to push it. So you have sub-patterns where you can tell Selenium, find the element with this prefix in the ID. You will see that a lot because there's a lot of libraries like ext that will generate random IDs for you. I don't know why that makes sense, but they do it. So the way to generally handle that is just specifying the prefix or the sub-pattern, and Selenium should find it. So you can do, again, prefix, suffix, and pattern in general, which is kind of both at the same time or being in the middle, whatever you want to be more specific or not. You can also do contains for inner text. So if you want to find a div that inside has certain text in it, you should use something like that. I don't really encourage you to do that because that means that the marketing people in your company will be able to break your test. Would be way better if you can just use IDs and things that are not shown to the final user. But as a last resource, I guess you can do it. Another thing to point out that I learned yesterday from one of the guys in the IRC is that you can even use regexes here, kind of regexes. So if you want to find an element that matches exactly this text and not just contains it, you can just do $sign and then the catter thing at the end, as in regexes. Now you can do some other smart things like filtering by not. Something like, I want to find this div, but it doesn't have to have the hidden class. And you can do all sorts of crazy negation things like not contains this text, and it can be complex enough. Cecil can take it, so you should try that out. Now these last two, I actually added them, but they're not part of the standard. Cecil included them because they thought it could be useful. They're just shortcuts for things like header is actually, we'll find every H1, H2, H3, H4 to H6. It's a pretty useful thing to do. I've never used it myself, but if your application is moving a lot and people in the future will maybe contemplate moving all the titles to H2 because of SEO purposes, doing something like this will make your test even take it without having to fix all the locators here and there. For inputs, also a shortcut. This will capture all text areas, selects, buttons, and things in the DOM. You may want to know about them, but be careful if you want to use them. Now, when not to use CSS locators, I've been in situations in which people come and say, hey, CSS sucks. I used it for a while, it was awesome, and then when I try to find this element I always use with XPATH, I just couldn't find the way to do it. I spent a month trying to build a locator, Googling, going to Stack Overflow. No one managed to help me. And that's because CSS has a lot of pros, but it has one con. CSS is not built to find single elements in the DOM or transverse the DOM. CSS is made to style things in a page. CSS was created for styling HTML documents. It's not about Selenium automating things. It's about creating your CSS for your website to look nice. That means that there's a lot of limitations. Even though it's a great tool, in some situations it's not going to work. I couldn't find ways to make it happen. So one of those, bottom-up navigation. XPath, on the other hand, is built completely for transversing a tree. You can go up and down, navigate. All XPath is meant to do is finding particular elements in a tree, generally one or more. So in this case, there's an XPath that says, I want to find the element with this ID, user1. Let's suppose it's this element. It's going to be a paragraph inside a table cell, inside a table row, and inside the whole table. So what I do is, also, this XPath is a shortcut for asterisk, ID, the whole thing. It's kind of faster to write. Definitely not fast. So we will find the element with that ID, and then we will go up the tree to the table row, or to the table cell, and then to the table row. And then we will find the other table cell and click on the delete user link. That's pretty awesome to do, and I've been in a lot of situations in which I needed to do that. You just want to find something in a row, something in a cell, then go to the row above, and then find another cell inside that row. With CSS, there's no real way to do it. There's a couple of hacks you can do. CSS gives you the plus sign. That means I want the sibling right in the right of my element. So you can find the cell and go to the right and then go to the right again. But that's not bottom-up navigation, and it's really brittle. If they add one column, or if they decide to just put this on the right and this on the left, everything will break. In those cases, I guess I advise you to use XPath. I use it myself. It's not so bad, but you may want to just focus on one and try to keep it consistent across all your tests. So that's one of the cases. The second one is Selenium 2. This one's actually pretty interesting. I'm still not completely decided why you shouldn't use CSS or why it's not my recommendation. But I'm just going to explain you what I think. Selenium 2 has this great WebDriver idea of page elements, right? Web elements. A WebDriver will find an element first, and then you will have a handle to that element. I made a mistake there, but it doesn't matter. So it will find an element for you. It will give you the handle, which is in this case the menu variable or the menu element. And then you can find stuff inside that element itself. So you don't always have to search in the full tree. You can just find something, keep it here, do some stuff, then come back to this element and find something inside it, and then find something inside that element. And that's pretty handy. It helps a lot with page object, and it makes code way more readable. So instead of doing the nesting in CSS, like in this case, I will do find me the menu ID thing, and then inside the menu, find me the input that has its name. You will do something like, all right, find me the menu. Now I have the menu. Now inside the menu, this should be menu, not driver. Find me the search, and now I have the search. And I can do whatever I want with the search. Ouch, this is search. I wrote this like 15 minutes before. So again, I can reuse the menu again and find more elements inside the menu. So I don't really need to do this. This is actually duplication. It's not awesome, because every time, if the menu changes, you will have to go to all your locators and actually fix them. Whereas in this case, all you got to do is just fix the menu, and then all the elements will just be found in the same way. I think that's the right approach. Just leave the nesting inside your code and not inside the locators in your code. Also, there's another insight. We've been talking with Simon Stewart about CSS and how they work in Selenium 2. And there's some bad news there. Selenium 2 doesn't have this idea of multiple windows. Selenium 2 will not open 2 windows for your app. It will just open your app. In Selenium 1, if you've written the test in Selenium 1, you will notice that 2 windows come up. The Selenium window that has the steps that are currently running and has the JavaScript libraries that Selenium will use in it, and the application window that will change its DOM and move all the time, and it's the one in which you're affecting stuff. In Selenium 2, there's only one window, and you can't inject stuff there because when the DOM changes, because when the application goes to a different page, the whole DOM will refresh, and the stuff that you injected will not be there anymore. So Simon found this problem. It's like, oh, I can't inject CSL there, because every time the window changes, CSL is not going to be there anymore, and I can't trust on CSL being there all the time. At the same time, I can inject CSL every time people change the page, or every time people try to do a CSS lookup. So there's no real solution. We couldn't find one yet. Reality is that with the decision that Simon took is, with the browsers that do support CSS natively, like Firefox, Chrome, Opera, everything but IE, and the newer versions, the older versions of Firefox and the older versions of Opera and whatever, Selenium will just rely on that. It will not inject anything. It will just call the browser's native, find me this element by CSS, and it will just trust that. In IE's case, it will inject CSL every time it wants to do a lookup. So if your test says something like, find this element by CSS, Selenium will just go inject CSL in the page and then call CSL saying, hey, CSL, find me this element, and we'll get it back. That's a pretty painful performance hit, because every time a command has to be set, we got to send like 20K, I don't really know how much CSL weighs, but 20K over the wire to the browsers so that we make sure that it's there. And that may not be as fast as it is in Selenium 1. So what's the thing? All right, in IE, we have CSL, and in the other browsers, we just have the native CSS implementation. And I don't know if I said that before. I wrote about that in a blog post in the Sauce blog. CSL actually doesn't implement the standard, the full standard. CSL does whatever they thought it was best, which means they will not have nth of type. They will not have nth child. They will have just nth, which for me is better, but for the standard it's not. And other browsers went with the standard, of course. So it may be inconsistent if you rely on CSL functionality that is not available in the CSS implementation and the standard implementation. So those things, again, are things like header or input or complexity inside the node. And I believe that regex is inside contains. That's a CSL thing. I got to confirm it. But the question was, am I saying nth is not supported in all browsers? And the answer is yes. In Selenium 2, the browsers that get CSL injected will find the element using nth. The other browsers, which are big majority, will just use their own native CSS parsing, and nth is not available there. So you will probably get a lookup exception.
So if you want consistent CSL performance and crappy performance, use IE.
Yes, exactly. If that's what you're looking for, definitely go with that. Yeah, sorry about that. We may find ways to improve it, but nowadays there's a lot of discussion right now going on. And Simon again said, we still didn't really release a 2.0 version. We're still in beta, and we're totally open for opinions on how this could be implemented better. If you really want to have CSL, or if you really want to do the standard CSS implementation, how we can do it in IE, there's a lot of stuff to work on. I actually wanted to measure performance in Selenium 2 in all the browsers, but I didn't get the time to do it. I will probably do it in the future and tweet about it. Just put the JSON file up in GitHub so that people just can pull it and do interesting metrics and take conclusions. Now, there's some references that you may be interested in. I wrote several blog posts, so most of them are me please let me know if there's another stuff that you should read about it. So the first one, start improving your locators, will suggest you how to start moving your basic XPATH, basic things like / equals space. It's pretty straightforward. Another one is the one in which I'm explaining why CSL is different than CSS, which are the locators that you can leverage in Selenium 1 and the ones that you should be aware of if you're writing Selenium 2 tests. There's another one, CSS Locators Demystified. It's where it kind of explains the most powerful things, like contains and sub-pattern matching, things like that. And there's also a quick reference. That is not me. Adam Gaucher wrote that. It's I have it in my desk all the time. It's just a, how do you call those? Quick sheet? It's like a small sheet with all the basics that you can read. Cheat sheet. So you can see that. I'm going to go through the useful tools now. Should we do the Q&A first or just go with the tools? All right, tools. Which tools can you use to write good CSS locators and test them and write your test using them? Number one, Selenium IDE. And you will say, no, Selenium IDE actually does XPATH. It doesn't do CSS. And I will answer, yes, but I wrote a new functionality inside Selenium IDE that will do CSS first. And it will suggest CSS. And if it can't find anything with CSS, it will do XPATH. It's pretty lame. It's like 12 lines of code, but it does a pretty good job. Actually finds using env, ID, class. It will also do the nice version. It will not do the ugly attribute square brackets thing. But if it's an IE, it will use hashtag. If it's a class, it will use a dot. So it's a nice try for record and playback. Hoping that the next version of IDE release will just include this. So from now on, every test that you record, first we'll try the basic locators like Selenium's ID or Selenium's link text. If it can't find anything with that, it will just do CSS. And then it will fall back to XPATH in some cases. Now, the last time I did this presentation, which was in the Selenium conference, one guy in the crowd said, hey, sounds like the conversion is pretty straightforward. Can I write a script that does the conversion for me? And he said, yes, you totally should be able to write it. It just requires a lot of horrible regular expressions matching and stuff. And after that presentation, I just decided to do it myself. So if you go to, that took me off the slides. Hope I can go back. So if you go to GitHub, it's open source. It's santiYCR/CSSify. You will see that you can call it from the terminal. It's a terminal application. I wanted to make a web app. I guess you just need a Python web server and import a library and use it. I may do it in the future for the people that is lazy. But all you need to do is just install Python, check out, clone the repo, and you will get a CSSify .py script, which is, here. So once you have it, all you do is just call CSSify with this string, and it will give you the right CSS version. Things like that will also be converted. I can also, I have it here. So you will see things like crazy long XPath that are horrendous. Things like this div with a class of blah, and inside I wanted this link with the ID of blah, and then inside I wanted to have a child that is an image that contains this in the source. And it will actually do a pretty good job converting it. I know it because I wrote it. So it will just give you the CSS. Around that, I was also planning to do some Python script that would import all your Celanese tests and fix them for you in a second. That would also be a pretty cool idea. I just don't have the time to do it. It's also full of tests. So if you want to check out the code, it's just a lot of regular expressions that are ugly. And then this is all the tests that it does, testing from things like if you try this, it will fail, but then it will. So if you find something that fails, just go to the repo, clone it, and write the test for it here. If the test fails, that means that we know about it and we will eventually fix it in the future. So all I do is just CSSify-T, and that will throw no errors. Now if I open it and do something like chase this, and it should say nth3, which probably won't do, hoping it won't do, it will give me, oh, there's a failure there. I expected 4, and it told me, I expected 3, and it told me 4. So it's a cool tool to have. If you want to batch convert your tests, this may be the first place to go. If it can't parse your XPATH, we all know that XPATH can be super crazy, have a lot of stuff in them. I didn't go after the whole thing because I knew I was not going to make it. I just went with the simple. And I think this is the MVP. What else? So Firebug, of course, if you don't have Firebug yet, you definitely should. It's the same thing as in Chrome. It's the Chrome Dev Tools and Firebug is the best way to write a good locator. You gotta understand the DOM. If you don't want to dedicate your time to it, you should. You gotta understand what's going on inside the DOM tree, because that's what Selenium looks at, and that's what Selenium understands. So if I want to click in this element, let's say, I will just right-click on it and do inspect element. It's the same thing in Firefox. You'll get a pointer to the right spot in the tree. So I'll do it in Firefox, because Firebug is way better. And we're in Mozilla's headquarters. So again, all I got to do is just go to the element I want, right-click. Slowness. There you go. Stop it. So again, all I got to do is just go to the element. I will see the tree. I can go to its parent, open and close it, understand the whole tree so that I can find the right locator, the most robust, the cleanest. Don't trust on bots. Don't trust on Selenium IDE recorded locator. It is smart, but it's definitely not better than a human being seeing the DOM, figuring out what's the best strategy in this case. So if you're going to be like, oh, my devs are never going to change the IDs, so I will trust on IDs. Or my devs are changing IDs all the time in classes, so I should just trust in the parent of this element, or whatever. You really have way more knowledge than what a bot would have of your elements, so you definitely want to trust in yourself first, and then in bots. If I would have to tell you what I do every day, if I want to create a test case, I will first go to Firefox. And I'm embarrassed to say this, I use the IDE all the time, even though I don't advise it. I would just go to the page, open the IDE, record. So for example, let's go to google.com. Look for Santi. That's all I do every night. Find it. I'll be #1 eventually. I don't even have a website, actually. So whatever, go there in the class, right-click, and do something like assert the text. Oh, you will notice that there's a CSS there. That was me. So you will record the whole thing. That's what I do all the time. I just record the super basics. And then, of course, I do options, format, Python, because that's what I like. And I just have the Python test. I copy only these few lines, because Selenium IDE gives me the basic locators. And it saves me a lot of time instead of going through the DOM for every single element. I will eventually find that, hey, maybe this locator is a little bit too long, or may not be maintainable. So I will improve that one. But at least I get the basics, and it saves me like half an hour of just doing the manual process, even though the purists will tell you not to. And another great thing I found, which actually led me to write the Selenium IDE CSS parsing, is Selector Gadget. This is a pretty cool tool. Let me see if I can. All right, so Selector Gadget is like a bookmark thing that you always have. It's just a bookmark that you add to your bookmarks. And when you open it, it will bring up, let me see if I have it. I probably do. Selector Gadget. There you go. So now it brought up this thing, and every time I hover in an element, it will allow me to select it. So I will do beautiful soup. And in the bottom, you will see, oh, you can't see that. Sorry about it. Let me try to fix it. There you go. So in the bottom, we'll give you the right selector to find that element. In this case, it didn't work. But for example, let's yellow ones.
When you put up something.
Oh, it puts a.
Click on a link and then click on the yellow ones. It'll start to eliminate those.
So now you have a path that matches everything that's yellow. Click on one that you don't want.
Oh, smart. You've used this in the past. So it will start going down the tree if you want to perfect this. So it's between this and Selenium IDE. I generally like to trust Selenium IDE more because I know that Selenium IDE is using exactly the same libraries that Selenium RC uses. So I just go with that. But this is pretty smart too if you just want to do something quick or if you want to confirm that there's no better locators. Again, always look at the DOM. Always use tools like Firebug or Chrome developer tools. All right, let's go for questions, and then that would be it. So the question is, you said that IDE and RC use the same strategy. They use the same inner libraries to find the elements. But when I did Selenium IDE, it recorded it for me. I added regexes inside the contains. And then when I write it in RC, it fails.
Selenium IDE didn't record it. I manually
Oh, OK. You wrote it, and it works in IDE.
Yeah.
It fails in RC.
I kept in the value and you click on the check, so it will locate on the page with the green color box.
Uh-huh.
And the IDE, that means IDE is able to recognize that element with that kind of CSS selector.
All right. So yeah, my guess would be you're using an old version of Selenium RC that is not using CSL inside it. Adding CSL to the CSS as the CSS parsing engine was done actually not too long ago. It was actually like a week before I wrote that blog post. I would say 6 months from now, 8 months ago. Jason Huggins actually made that change, and it was one of the last changes that we did to Selenium 1. Nowadays, every dev is working on Selenium 2. But if you have Selenium RC 1.0.3 or SOS RC, which is kind of a wrapper on Selenium RC, that has Selenium 1.0.3. So CSS locators will not work.
I'm using the IDE that you posted in your plan.
Right. So the IDE is the latest version. The IDE is using CSL. RC, if you're using an old one, if CSL locators work in IDE and they don't work in RC, I'm tempted to say it's always going to be an old version of RC. But if that's not the case, definitely bring it up in the dev list or somewhere else.
So where I can get the latest version of RC? Like it's now on the website in Selenium 2 if I want to download it.
Yeah, you got to get that one, Selenium 2. The Selenium 2 jar, even though it says Selenium 2 and you want to run Selenium 1 test, that jar is magic. It has both Selenium's 2 server running and Selenium 1 server. So if you start it, it will do all this stuff. And if you throw WebDriver test to it, it will run them. And if you throw Selenium 1 test to it, it will just work. So just get the 2.0 jar and use it as always. Just start it with java.jar, and it will be a regular RC. The question is if there's a big difference between having a long XPATH or CSS locator and a short one. I didn't get to test it extensively because I had to put some boundaries in what I wanted to test because I didn't have enough time. My guess is yes, because what Selenium has to do is first parse the whole XPath or the whole CSS, and then do the whole navigation and logic behind it. If you only give it one element, it will parse that and act on it clearly. If you give 10 nested, it will probably take a while to first parse it and then do the filtering in different levels. I would have to test it, but I've seen crazy tests that take like 95 seconds to find an element. That's a lot of time. In IE. No, in Firefox it's always fast. In Firefox it's almost like if you only code for Firefox and you really like XPath, I don't know how you do it, but you should. Yeah, you can stick to it if you want to. My advice is always CSS, mostly because of the readability and all this knowledge base that is already built around CSS. All the web development world, everyone doing style sheets and everyone doing jQuery staff know about CSS. And when they see an XPATH, they're going to be like, what is this thing full of slashes? All right, you're being positive about, you're seeing the good part about long locators. You're saying that you want it to be long because that gives you more specificity. That means my test will be more robust. I will never find an element that I didn't want to find. The bad side of that is you're being too brittle. If you define a single nesting level, it may find another element, but it will also be way more robust because the element will not the locator will not depend on the parent elements of the final element you're looking for. So depending on how much your application is moving, you can go with the path of, I'm going to make it more robust, a single nesting level. I know that this ID will never change. Or I know that the content of this tag will never change, so I use contains. But if you do it long, you also go down the path of making it brittle. And your developers may just decide to change the tree structure. Even though they don't change your element, they will change the position, and that will break your locator. You kind of choose whatever you like the most. They will eventually break your test if they want to, but they always do. We know about it. You're saying, can we use Selenium to find things like the browser truncating text for us, which we don't want to happen? Right. I'm going to say maybe, depending on the case. We got to know that Selenium is not a human being. We got to understand that Selenium is a bot. And it's smart, but not smart of a real tester doing manual stuff. So sometimes Selenium will, even if, like for example, if you make, I heard this in IMU, someone made the buy button be white. So it wasn't part of the screen at all. For any human being, the button wasn't there. And Selenium passed that test, of course. Selenium finds the button because it's part of the DOM. It doesn't care whether it's visible or not. It will never understand, oh, this is white, and the background is white. So this probably is not visible. I should make an error here. That's just humans. So you got to understand the limitations in Selenium. And for the stuff that Selenium won't work, either do manual or implement something cool like Sequally. You got to have different levels. Jason Huggins, when he does his presentations, he always likes to do the testing pyramid, where he says how much testing you should do at each level. He always uses unit tests in the bottom, which are the fast, developer-oriented tests. They're way faster. They take 1 millisecond. You should have tons of those. And you can write them in like 30 seconds. Now, you should have some of automation level. And Selenium is generally in the top. What I think is actually that on top of Selenium, you should have something else that tests things like usability, all the buttons to be really visible. You can do that by hand, too. But the idea is Selenium is really high in the top, and that kind of testing is even higher. Hope that answers the question. All right. So you're saying that depending on the device, the browser will make a different DOM for the element that you're looking for. In that case, it's pretty hard. The only way Selenium works is by parsing the DOM and understanding the structure. If you want to write a single test that works on all devices, you should have a DOM that is stable in all of them. Otherwise, you will find yourself in the position in which you're like, if I'm running in this mobile device, I will try to find this element. Otherwise, if I'm on IE, I will use this locator. I've done that in the past. It's
be the same, but it renders differently across different devices.
OK, yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Rendering is not really Selenium's core. Selenium cares about the DOM. If the DOM is the same, if the element is part of the DOM, Selenium will find it, will act on it without any problems. Now, if the DOM changes, that's another thing. And if you really want to care about rendering, how it looks, nowadays you can use Sequally. You can use image comparison, which there's a great presentation of one guy in G-Talk like a year ago. Jason Huggins also loves to link to that. It does like capture a screenshot using Selenium and then compare that the screenshots are kind of the same. I'm really against that because all the cases I've seen that it's actually super brittle. So it will fail depending on the resolution. It will fail if the element is there, but just a little bit to the right. I guess I would advise manual plus, I don't know, spend some time in SQL and trying to do image comparison, but good luck.
That means, the basic use case scenario is your iPad, right? When you hold it in a landscape mode, it renders differently. When you hold it in a portrait mode,
Yeah.
box shifts to right or something.
Yeah, that's definitely not Selenium's land. How the browser renders, moving the mobile device to the right or to the left, and how it renders there, definitely not Selenium's land. I've seen something in the mobile testing Selenium meetup like a month ago, actually, a guy talking about Frank. They managed to make the iPhone switch and check that stuff. They still didn't check the visual styling, but they checked that the DOM is there. Nowadays, there's nothing really smart that I would recommend other than have a guy, after you have like 99.95 of your tests made with Selenium, you will leave this 1% to a guy that spent 25 minutes going through the app and testing the visuals and making sure that it doesn't look bad, because that's the only thing that Selenium can do, visuals and how the DOM is displayed in the browser. It's going to be way more efficient than spending 2 years trying to make a library. Hopefully someone does it, but if you want to get things done.
Device profiles, so means we take it like there is a lot of device profiles, like 14,000 device profiles on there.
Yeah.
So
It's going to be a headache. I heard that Google has a mobile devices wall where they have all their phones in a wall. And if you want to test something, you can just go to one of their phones and test it. I don't know. It's no real solution nowadays for it. I hope there will be in the future. I'm pretty sure there will. But so the question is, which Selenium version would you use to recommend mobile browsers and things like that? Which Selenium version? Always the latest. Always use Selenium 2. Start moving your tests to Selenium 2. Selenium 1, it's pretty good. I know a lot about it, but reality is that everything is happening in Selenium 2 land. It makes developers write better tests by enforcing this web element principle. And it's also working really hard into supporting iPhone, Android. And the last meetup again, Jason made a presentation of Selenium tests running on an Android phone, a real Android phone, like putting it in the middle of the webcam and showing everyone that it was driving the browser. You can do emulators. Definitely Selenium 2 is the way to go. Even if OB or the Nokia browser is not supported, there's way more chances that it will happen in Selenium 2 land. Selenium 1, it's not dead. We're maintaining it, but it's not actively developed at all. There's no more features there. We're just moving everyone to the new browser automation of the future. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, these awesome frameworks that only work on IE6. I've worked with those. I love them so much. Yeah, I guess Selenium 2 support for IE is pretty good, actually. They do a lot of stuff natively, which means the click is not going to be done using JS. It's going to be done using like the real OS level click events sent to the browser, which is way more robust than Selenium. Selenium does this hackery with JS, trying to trigger all the events that it can that could replicate a click by a user. But reality is that I've been in all these situations in which the click won't work. If you do it by hand, it works. If you do it with Selenium, it won't. It's probably because the framework that they're using is not listening for the right event. And you got to do all this crazy stuff like triggering mouse down, then focus out, then triggering mouse up, then focusing again. And you end up writing like this huge that you will call click element now. And that will be your click. That will work with your application. That's pretty bad. It's not maintainable at all. So my advice would be try Selenium 2. It does things better, and it will be a solution, hopefully. You're saying developing or trying to write my test using Firebug, I got to find this element that comes and goes all the time in the DOM. It will suddenly appear in the DOM and then disappear, and you're not fast enough to click on it and really see what's it's built off. Huh. I don't really know if I have an answer for that, other than understand the JavaScript beneath your app and hack around it. Try to make your app, just move your app yourself. You will know that, you will find out that this element that comes and goes all the time, appears because someone calls JavaScript. So you can probably just call that JavaScript function yourself using Firebug, and you would bring it up. If you just want to see it and know which one it is, you can just write a CSS rule yourself that you can inject in Firebug and be like, I want the element with this location to be green and big. So when it comes up, you will just see it pretty clearly instead of having to look in the DOM in Firebug.
But more important, I want to see the DOM part, the inspect element part.
Oh, you really want to see the DOM.
If I'm looking at it, it comes up, it highlights the DOM for a second and shows you what it is,
but it disappears. At this point, my best advice would be first use Sauce Labs because there's a video of it and you can pause it. Second would be, what was I going to say? Oh, talk to your developers. If you can, I always advise developers and testers sit next to each other. If you really got to figure out, you don't have to fight against the application and how complex it is and how challenging it is. You always have the guy that wrote it probably next to you if it's in another building or another country or you can't communicate with him. You will find a way to talk to them. But it will definitely save you months maybe of trying to work around this and find the right way to do it by yourself. Even though it's fun, it's not productive. I've done it several times. And it's if you can always go and talk to the guy and be like, hey, I got to find this element, it will be, oh, I wrote that. This is the element. And that will be it. So communication between testers and developers nowadays is crucial. I hate the word agile, but I don't know if there's a word that represents that better. But yeah, try to be agile and talk to your developers and stuff.
Nimble instead of agile.
Can I say nimble instead of agile? That's, yeah, of course. Let's change it to nimble until that is a buzzword. And then we'll have to change it again. I just don't want any certifications around this word. You said, if I already have a unique locator that is class-based for my element, but further up the tree, I found an ID element, which would be even more robust, just in case the class changes in the future, the DOM changes, and the class is removed. Should I use that and make my locator a little bit longer, but maybe more robust? The answer is always it depends. It depends on how your application is moving, how much your developers are willing to change that class or not. I would say yes. I would just always try to start from an ID and then just do relative child space and then the other one. But it really depends on the case. It's always the situation in which you are. If your application is under super active development, it started last week, and it's going to be like that for months, maybe you should not start writing your locators right now, and you should just wait and build your Selenium framework. There's a lot of ways to take it, and different companies do it in different ways, and they all could work. I kind of do have one. The concern is Firefox 4 came out, and Selenium 1, by being JavaScript based, magically just supported it. That's a pretty cool thing about Selenium 1. It's just JavaScript, and every browser does JavaScript, so things just work when a new browser comes up. Kind of work. In this case, Firefox 4 came up, and everything just works fine except for alerts and confirmations. Selenium can't handle them. I think there's a change in the implementation in Firefox that makes Selenium not be able to plug itself to the alert or the confirmation. I think it also fails with new Windows. I've been really tempted to just go inside Selenium Guts, find out what's going on, and try to fix it. I didn't have the time yet. I would love to cooperate with the guys and Mozilla to do it too. And I think Simon Stewart also tried to fix it, and he couldn't. I have a workaround, though. If your application doesn't do multiple domain navigation, you can just use Firefox Proxy, which is the proxy mode of Firefox. It's not the enhanced privilege mode. That just works. I just found it working. So it's a decent workaround for now. Would be awesome if we can fix Selenium to make it happen.
So you're saying
Switch to using Firefox Proxy as the browser string instead of Firefox by itself. They're just different modes that Selenium uses to drive the browser. One is using proxy injection, and the other one is just bring this special version of the browser that is the same but allows JavaScript to do all sorts of crazy stuff, like navigating through different domains. Again, if your application has different domains, I go to Facebook and then I come back, proxy mode is not going to work, but it's a good workaround for some situations. Other one is just check out the code of Selenium, use Firebug, get inside the code, and figure out what's going on. I don't have the time yet, but you could totally do it. It's not that hard to debug JavaScript inside the browser. That's what they say. All right, since that's it, thanks, guys. Oh, and follow me on Twitter.